Hello and welcome to today's discussion. You're very welcome to this Euractiv debate together with the International Centre for Future Generations. We're going to be talking today about quantum technologies and how Europe can lead in the future. I'm Jennifer Baker and I will be your moderator today, so welcome to those in the room as well as all of you joining online. As always, we will be using Slido to allow you to put your questions to our excellent panellists. You can scan that QR code with your phones if you're here in the room, or of course, if you're joining online, you can use the box on your screen. And please also follow along using the social media of your choice and do tag us using the hashtag QuantumTech or the hashtag EA Debates. We'd love to hear what you think. With that, I'm happy to welcome to our stage today Pascal Maillot, Acting Head of the Quantum Technologies Unit within DG Connect in the European Commission. We also have Matija Matokovic, who is Deputy Head of the Innovation Unit, NATO, and also ex-DG GROW, I believe, back in your history of your career, so knowing a bit about the Commission side as well, potentially. Andrea Rocchetto is CEO and co-founder of EFOS, and Leonardo Quattrucci is Senior Fellow from the International Centre of Future Generations. And joining us remotely, we're also pleased to welcome to the discussion Marieke Hood, Executive Director and Impact Translator of GESA, Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator Accelerator. So thank you very much for joining us, Marieke. I appreciate the effort. Pascal, let me start with you, and I'll come to each of you in turn and ask you to set the scene and tell us where you think Europe is positioned with regard to quantum, how we compare with the rest of the world. Give us an idea of why you think it's important to discuss this today.
Yeah. Well, I think you have all read the Draghi's report that was became public some days ago. Quantum is mentioned, and there are some very important elements in this report. Quantum is really a game changer for the future. We will have the opportunity to talk about it in very different sectors. So it's very important that Europe is on the top on this innovation field and has its own development with industries, startups, etc. in Europe. We are, for the moment, perhaps at the beginning of the race, even if there are already great developments, and Europe is very strong. We have excellent universities, excellent researchers, and now we have as a goal to transform that to the market with products, with industrialization, and with creation of jobs also. So I think, well, you are the manager of the panel, but I think today it would be great to see how we can transform this excellent base in Europe that many countries are jealous of, especially our researchers, to real products in the market, a real industrialization of the quantum technologies that, I will repeat again, will really transform our society.
We will indeed absolutely talk about that. Matija, let me ask you to tell us a little bit about what you're working on. We'll come into a little bit more detail on the NATO quantum community in due course, but how do you view it from your perspective?
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for inviting NATO to this panel today. It's very great to have a transatlantic perspective. So even though most of NATO's allies are indeed European allies, we're also a transatlantic alliance. So we have both sides of the coin in this game. We, as NATO, have recognized quantum as a game changer. So essentially, the way we will continue to be able to perform our core tasks, deterrence and defense, for the whole alliance, in the future will undoubtedly and critically depend on quantum, on AI, and a few other EDT, emerging and disruptive technologies. So to that end, NATO as a whole, so all the 32 allies, have agreed recently a NATO quantum strategy, a first of its kind, that sets political goals for what a quantum-ready alliance looks like. That's the main ambition, but also sets a number of tasks that are divided between the allies and the NATO enterprise. Within those, there's a few things that we emphasize. We divide everything into a foster and protect taskers. So we want to foster the ecosystem for quantum. We want to understand what are the critical elements in that ecosystem, what are the types of investments that are needed, what is the type of knowledge and awareness that we need to have, and how we can protect that. In terms of main strategic objectives, I will outline three. There's a lot of community building. So NATO is a platform, so it facilitates those types of community building activities, and it's intending to do that via the transatlantic quantum community. It also wants to recognize how we can spread the benefits of quantum, but also the protective shield of quantum across the alliance. There's a big disparity between allies, of course, and it's very open to partners, be it partner institutions like the EU, but also partner nations.
We'll get on to some of those elements in a little bit more detail. Marieke, let me come to you. People here are obviously familiar with the European Commission and with NATO, but tell us a bit more about you and your work you're doing.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you also for the invitation to join this distinguished panel. Very happy, and sorry I couldn't make it to Brussels today. My role at the Geneva Science Diplomacy Anticipator is Executive Director Impact, but I'd like to start by giving you a bit of a perspective on where we come from. So about GESDA, the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, we are a foundation that was initiated by the Swiss government in 2019. And with GESDA, what the Swiss government wanted to do is to give a tool to the multilateral system to first help diplomats better comprehend the future disruptive science that is currently in the making in the labs across the world. And second, to help diplomats and policymakers to act upon this disruptive science, to first design a governance, of course, that would enable those benefits to reach maximum amount of society. So in the past 18 months, I have been focusing a lot on quantum computing because our science diplomacy community has prioritized quantum computing already in 2021 as one of the key areas for science diplomacy to come into play. And that work has culminated in the launch of the Open Quantum Institute. It's an initiative that we have launched in March 2025. That is the result of a multi-stakeholder work, but also global work, global scope, with a lot of representatives from, at the moment, we have more than 65 countries involved in the Open Quantum Institute, which has two objectives. The first objective is to avoid that we create with quantum computing a new digital divide. So it's a matter of equitable distribution and inclusivity in the development, but also in the ability to benefit from future science. And the second key goal of the Open Quantum Institute is actually, I'm making the link with what my predecessors were saying earlier in the panel, is to look at the applications of quantum computing as we get closer to applicability at scale, real-world applications. The Open Quantum Institute is looking at fostering and nurturing and exploring the applications that can help with our global challenges. So those of the UN organizations, that's also why we are based in Geneva, and that are about public health, mitigation of the climate change, and also food security, which are the three first topics, big topics or big domains where the Open Quantum Institute is active. So this operation is this institution, a new institution, is global. It's multi-stakeholder. It's hosted at CERN, but it has a lot of, and I must say, the European quantum community has been extremely supportive of the Open Quantum Institute, both on the academic side and the private sector side, but also the philanthropic sector has been very supportive of the Open Quantum Institute. Just one last point on global governance. As part of the Open Quantum Institute, from the very beginning, scientists, but also industry leaders have recognized that governance was to play a key role if Open Quantum Institute was to deliver on its mission. So from the very beginning, the Open Quantum Institute has been curating a diplomatic discussion with more than 30 countries in Geneva and in country, so that we can discuss what the future governance of quantum computing could look like if we wanted to be supportive of the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you very much, Marika, and we'll expand on some of those as we go through our discussion. Andrea, tell us about your organization. You've founded and you're CEO, so talk people through your motivations, if you like, and how you see the world at the moment.
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Euractiv and ECFG, for the invitation. Hopefully, I'll be able to provide some sort of boots on the ground perspective of many of the topics today. Why? Mostly because our organization is backed both by NATO and the EU. Very fitting in terms of some of the topics that were mentioned by the other panelists. What we do is chip manufacturing, and we focus on chips for quantum technologies. Not just computing, but also sensing and communications, which are two areas that I think should be always on our minds when we talk about quantum. Often they take a bit of a less prominent role, but they are really critical, mostly because they're closer to give us tangible advantages. The company is mostly based here in the EU, but we also have a presence in the United States. So this transatlantic link is critical for us. We believe this link must be nurtured, mostly because the capital markets in the US remains a fundamental element for scaling a company in technology. And we're very much aware of the risks of barriers coming on the Atlantic. We're very much trying to make sure that these barriers don't reach a point where the flow of capital will become harder to scale technological organizations.
And finally, Leonardo, tell us why we're here today. Set the scene for us at the moment. Why is this juncture particularly important?
Well, the juncture is ICFG's reason to exist is that technologies are going to have, emerging technologies such as quantum are going to have a disproportionate impact on what the future looks like, but decisions are taken in the present. And somehow the Draghi report makes this about competitiveness, and the quantum technologies are not yet an industry. They're an industry to be built. And government plays a critical role in building that industry. Institutions play a critical role. And the report outlines the gap and some experiments that we don't want to repeat. In the cloud business, for instance, Europe has been left behind. We don't want to be left behind in quantum technologies. And I believe a critical link between the inputs that Pascal was mentioning, great research, IP, inventions, and the output, a European industry that can compete with the US, with China, is industrial policy, which means better institutional capacity. Today, investment is mostly grant-making by bureaucracies. It needs to shift into investment and accompanying these companies in their growth by governments and innovators as buyers. And I think that's the missing link, industrial policy as institutional capacity.
Well, you've outlined quite well how I want to actually discuss today this topic. Firstly, I'd like to come round to each of you and focus a bit on those quantum technologies, what they do. Marika suggested possibly in the area of tackling climate change. I'm sure you'll be able to talk to us, Mattia, about the defence side of it. What the disruptions are, where the hopes are. Then we'll come back around to discussing the funding, the public-private element of that, the building in the links to competitiveness and what the policy has to do with that. And then we'll look a little bit to the future and what challenges lie ahead, what policy gaps there are, and what the next steps might be. So let me come then, Mattia, to you. I said defence. Tell us about where the disruption is going to happen and what we can expect.
Thank you again. I'd like to start by saying that when it comes to the use cases that we're interested in, we look at different types of quantum technologies. So we're interested in sensing, in communications, in computing. However, those are almost artificial categories of quantum technologies. We understand that those are actually the varied complexities of the same technology and of the same quantum phenomena that we know can have a disruptive function on the way we do business. So let me just give you an example. If your ability to project power or your ability to safeguard your citizens rests on your ability to have your underwater critical infrastructure hidden from your adversaries or your strategic competitors, the moment those strategic competitors get an ability to discover where your submarines are, is the moment where your ability to perform your tasks is eroded. The moment when someone who is not in the alliance has access to a quantum computer that can crack any code, is the moment we lose the ability to project trust, even if that power is not used against us. But if we cannot have the trust in our financial transactions, in our communications, in the command and control systems, this then becomes a serious strategic issue for an alliance such as NATO.
Pascal, I mean, we've mentioned tackling climate change. I mean, there's also areas around new materials where quantum could be relevant. How is the Commission thinking about these possible disruptions in terms of its strategy?
First, the quantum computer doesn't really exist for the moment. So we expect a lot of innovation coming from this quantum computer, but we might be surprised that if, in fact, we get even more than what we were expecting. All these strategic development, you mentioned several, in the military applications. We are dealing more with civilian applications. For instance, we can mention also drugs, personalized medicine with the super power capacity of the future quantum computer. But I would like to mention also, for instance, quantum MRI. These MRI that we have in hospitals, we are now developing quantum MRI for faster and more accurate analysis. For the Green Deal impact, we are also working on, for instance, a deployment of quantum gravimeters, which will give us more precisions on the water cycle, for instance. So all these strategic impact that quantum can bring is always in our mind when we establish calls for projects that we publish to the stakeholders. And we do that for communication, for computers, and for sensors.
Andrea, boots on the ground. Give us some practical application examples on maybe ones we haven't touched on already, healthcare, defense, climate change. I really want to get the sense of how disruptive the technologies can be.
So ultimately, rather than an application, I would give an image of how I like to think about quantum computers. And quantum computers are telescopes or microscopes. So these are tools that allows us to see and understand matter at a scale that today remains inaccessible to us. And important fact of nature is quantum. And if we want to manipulate nature more, and that's for building whatever we want, from materials, drugs, chemicals, you name it. Ultimately, we will need an ability to understand and process matter at the quantum scale. And a quantum computer is essentially a tool that enables that. So it's very hard at the stage we're in to predict what quantum computers are really going to do in 50 years' time, as it was hard to do the same thing for non-quantum computers when in the 40s people were building them. I mean, who would have guessed that 50 years after our phones, the internet, I mean, these are things that have been hard to predict and are hard to predict for quantum computers. So this power to control and predict the behavior of quantum matter, which is the only matter that really exists ultimately, is why we need to build a quantum computer.
Leonardo, there's always a lot of focus on quantum computing, but that's not the beginning and the end of quantum, of course. And we also hear a lot of talk about post-quantum crypto, where there's a bit of a fear-mongering going on, there's a little bit of concern, people feel uneasy. Tell us about how we should be thinking about this and focus a little bit on maybe some unfounded fears or perfectly reasonable concerns.
Well, certainly the fact that a sufficiently powerful quantum computer may be able to crack existing encryption protocols is a fact. And that fact is the one that triggered competition amongst governments to fund quantum computers in the first place, right, to be able to get that advantage. But quantum should be thought about as a portfolio of technologies with multiple applications, some of which have been mentioned. And I think the focus on quantum computers and the hype that came with it has sort of captured the attention of public investors. And if you have enough money to fund the whole pie, that's fine. But if you don't, as it is the case in most places or in Europe, then you're losing your comparative advantage. And so I think if we don't manage to grow the pie because our funding is quite spread across member states and sometimes it funds too thinly too many fields, then it's time to reassess where can we have comparative advantage in areas that could be critical as compute infrastructure, not just quantum computers, but as enabling infrastructures to different fields and invest in those with calibrated bets. One of those, I think, is photonics, for instance.
Marika, I know you work a bit in science diplomacy. Tell us a bit about where quantum fits into the discussions you're having. I know you also focused on sustainability questions, but we've heard here from the panelists in the room about the huge potential, the huge disruptive, but generally positive potential. But there is also a reticence. Why aren't we getting the funding we need? Tell us your perspective on that.
Yeah, on the funding, I'm not sure I can answer because it's not really a topic we address. We leave that to the governments to decide where they want to allocate their funding. The role of the Open Quantum Institute is actually to try and provide as robust evidence as we can when it comes to the actual potential of quantum computing in some fields of applications. I named a few of those. We know that this research is still research. It's very exploratory. It's hard work in itself to come up with use cases, and that's what of quantum computing, and that's what industry is chasing, but it's also what our community is chasing. So what we are trying to do with the Open Quantum Institute is we are bridging the problem owners. Let's say, for example, WHO has as a key priority, the World Health Organization, and one of their key priority is to find ways to discover new antibiotics. There has not been any new antibiotic invented since the end of the 1980s. And with the current science, we have not been able to discover anything. So the key question that WHO, for example, and GARD-P, which is its subgroup dedicated to antimicrobial resistance, has asked the Open Quantum Institute is reach out to your community of global scientists and try and find identify ways quantum computers could help us discover new antibiotics. And it seems like it's a relatively simple question. But when you have to bridge the quantum science, quantum scientists, quantum researchers, quantum algorithmics, and the real life problem, you realize that it's not that easy at all. It's a huge work, and I'm sure all the quantum experts in this panel will confirm that, to ensure that we address with quantum computers real world problem, and that the solution that we find with quantum computers is effectively benchmarked against classical solutions, so that we can see where quantum computers effectively provide an advantage over classical computational approaches. That's the endeavor that we are engaging with. We have at the Open Quantum Institute, we're working on 20 use cases with scientists and industry across the world. A lot of those use cases have contributions from European institutions or companies. But to answer your question, I really think that is the key. How do you bridge the quantum science with the real world problem and the applications that actually matter for humanity?
Well, thank you. In terms of investment, we're saying that there is not sufficient investment here in Europe compared to other parts of the world. I mean, there's many studies have shown that. Why is that, Pascal? And I mean, obviously, it's not all on the European Commission to fund it, but why is that gap there compared to, for example, the US? And how do we cope with it?
Well, first, it depends on which kind of investment we are talking about here. Because if it's public investment, we are first or second, it depends on the figures, because we don't know exactly what China is doing. In terms of public investment, we are at around 7 billion euros for the EU, yes, and the different member states. United States has not reached this amount. So in terms of public money, I think we are fine. This is for research, so calls for research, and also deployment of infrastructure that Leonardo was mentioning. We deploy infrastructures where, for the moment, the private sector will not get in. So we do that to attract the private sector, then to take the rest of the work. The issue we have in Europe, and this was clearly mentioned in the Draghi's report, is on the private funding. We have 25% of the startups in quantum in Europe, but we get only 5% of the funding of quantum in the world. Well, you will not be surprised to learn that most of it is in the US, I would say, as usual. So that's really the issue, and that's our objective for the coming months and years, is to see how to attract more now these private investment, so that the big companies and the private funders put more money in this domain. We have startups in Europe. We have excellent ones, so they envy us for that. But we don't have, for instance, big industries really putting money in the sector. They put, it's not completely, it's not zero, but it's not at the level where we would like to see it. So in a nutshell, public money, and we will go on for investment in quantum technologies. We shouldn't stop it, of course. But the issue is more with private funding.
I mean, when it comes to tech funding in the EU, this is sort of an evergreen conversation. We talk about, oh yes, we have lots of great initiatives, but we're very light on VC and private equity funding. With quantum, Leonardo, can you identify why that is? Is there a risk aversion here? What is it?
You know, I think there is, part of it is that the funding is dispersed through, there is a jungle of instruments, and there is a jungle of access points in member states that companies, startups mostly, because that's where breakthrough innovation comes from, have to get through. And so I think that's a discouraging factor to get to that funding. In fact, even next generation EU funds have not been fully dispersed because there isn't enough absorption capacity by firms. So I think that's one piece. The second one is for funds getting through the regulation. I mean, just even the perception, and this is something the Draghi report calls out as well, is that just the perception of the complexity of regulatory compliance discourages investors. And then there is also the fact that as you grow as a company, you want to access a large market seamlessly. And we don't have yet that here. Yes, this was the other report, was the Letta report. So we have many reports to refer to. I think one final piece I want to mention is public procurement. It's 14% of EU GDP. Some studies show that 1% gain in efficiency in public procurement would be in about 20 billion euros. So that's why agencies like DARPA work, because startups know who the buyer is, how to get to that money, and what technology they're developing. And if we could focus procurement as a strategic tool for technology development rather than a compliance exercise, I think we could get a head start in this industry.
I mean, Andrea, I'm interested in your perspective on this. I mean, who are your customers and how are you making a success of it?
Yeah, we work globally, and most of our customers are between the US and the EU. Of course, there are certain countries with whom we cannot work and don't want to work with. But in North America and the EU, yeah, it's an open field. We work from governments to big tech to startups, so these are the entities that are working on quantum tech today. But coming back to Leo's point, I absolutely very much agree with him that this fragmentation of funding and complexity of regulations are definitely hindering the efforts to attract capital from abroad. And that's where certainly in our case, so our main investor is an American venture capital firm, and they were very explicit in telling us that one of the key challenge they saw for our growth was excessive regulation, and at every step, even just at the tech transfer level. Transferring technology from a European academic institution into a company, it's harder than it is in the United States. It's slower, more complex. And so these are, I mean, all pretty banal observations, but ultimately do matter. And we really touched them very, very vividly. I mean, our spin-off process took more than 1 year. And we had to invest a lot of financial resources for that as well.
Mattia, I mean, I don't want to agree that Andrea's comments are banal, far from it, but they are quite commonplace when it comes to all sorts of technologies across the board. What is it that makes quantum unique or different in terms of this investment, competitiveness, regulation sector ball, if you like, of competing factors? Yeah.
That's a several billion-dollar question, right? And I would also agree with you. I don't think that your statements are banal at all. It's important to hear them. I think it's important to be repeating that message. And on that note, it's super complex, and the use case is just not yet clear. We are kind of getting there. In the narrative is changing a bit. We're hearing more and more that this is something that will happen in the next few years. I don't want to put an exact number of years, but it's a single-digit number as opposed to a double-digit number. So there is, we see a bit of change there. There is still a lot of work that needs to be done on de-risking that narrative, on de-risking that trust of getting into quantum, because it's not only scaling up a whole industry, it's also scaling up everything that we need for it to be there, the manufacturing, the production capabilities, the toolkits, the use cases, the links with procurers. And then it goes down all the way to the lawyers that will be running the procurement, who need to know that this is a thing, that the technical requirements for a quantum system make sense. So there is a reconfiguration of the system that needs to happen at every single step of the way. And this is really, really hard, which is why there needs to be a lot of alignment. And every bit of coordination and alignment that can be done actually gets us closer to crossing that milestone of having ubiquitous quantum.
Marika, I mean, I want to bring you back in. You can feel free to comment on everything you're hearing from here in the room, but also to maybe look at what might be the risks for Europe in falling behind other countries in other parts of the world.
Well, on that front, what I see again with our community is that the European scientists and the companies that are engaging with OQI are very much totally in line with the game, if not ahead of the game in a lot of the applications that we are exploring. I would say that agreeing with what Mattia was saying, the investment is complicated because again, return on experience. If you tell clients or end users that the computer that on which the application will be running might be actually operational in 8 to 10 years, it's hard for them to first understand why they should start the exploration of the applications, the development of the algorithms, and look at the way those algorithms are implemented on machines that are not mature yet. So we are, again, if you don't really have a very large end market for investors, even early stage investors, it's hard to project what the return on investment might be. And so if you are a deep tech investor, of course you're looking at quantum. Of course you have quantum companies in your pipeline, but you might not first want to invest huge tickets in those companies when the need for investment is actually pretty larger than for example, a digital, like a classical digital company that would develop an app. So there's a disconnect between the size of the market, which is at the moment still small because the computers are not ready at scale, and the need for investment, which is rather large. And I think the EU does a good job, and again, public funding in quantum computing in the EU is more than significant. So the public sector here does its job in trying to bridge this gap that I just mentioned.
Well, staying with the potential for risks or concerns, this question is directed towards you, Pascal, but anyone can feel free. It's from Leonardo Veneziani, asking, how can we prevent quantum from becoming like chips, an area where we develop problematic dependencies over time? So supply chain concerns, over reliance, and I suppose bringing into questions there about strategic sovereignty and so on. Pascal, your thoughts on whether that's a problem that we should be thinking about?
No, that's clearly a problem that we are aware of. We have published some months ago the Economic Security Strategy, and quantum is one of the technologies mentioned in the report. And in that context, we are now working on the risk assessment. It's rather confidential, the data, you can guess why, of everything that we need to build these quantum technologies, and certainly where we are dependent of some countries. So there are different elements. It's not always easy to gather them, but in fact we have some dependencies. Not everything exists in Europe. And the next step will be to work on the mitigation measures, of course, to see how we can avoid these dependency. If we are talking about partners, allies, still it's an issue if you have a dependency, but the situation is quite worse is if it's with states that we call non-like-minded countries. I don't have to mention them. I think you all know about which countries I'm thinking about. Yes, there are dependencies. Yes, it's a concern, and but we are aware of it, and we are working on it to avoid these dependencies, because, as you mentioned, to build a strategic autonomy, I mean, it won't be possible if we are dependent on some materials or components for the quantum ecosystem.
Mattia, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this as well. Perhaps you could unpack them for us.
Thank you. At NATO, we rely rather on the allies to talk about supply chains and the critical dependencies of supply chains, especially the EU. However, when it comes to quantum, because we are trying to foster the ecosystem for this particular technological domain, we're trying to understand what is it that we need to have in the alliance, what are the capabilities we need to have, so that we can prop up the ecosystem. And just understanding where those capabilities are already is quite important. But in outlining the economic security aspects, we are looking a lot to the EU.
Yeah, Andrea.
Yeah, if I can interject in this interesting discussion, what I think it's important to point out is that quantum technologies are still very much in the R&D phase. And barriers to collaboration, to scientific collaboration and industrial collaboration do significant harm to our capacity to move faster and develop faster this technology. So when we talk about barriers with allies, I think it's very, very dangerous. And as a company, we have been seeing barriers being put up, and our ability to work with our partners in the United States has diminished over the last year. And the Americans are doing similar things, so it's a mutual thing, but we very much see this as a significant risk for the field, because there is still a lot of work that needs to be done to building the technology that does not exist yet.
Well, we've talked a bit about shortages of finance. What about shortages of talent? I mean, are you finding there's sufficiently trained people in Europe, Andrea? Or do we need to expand training in this area?
I think we are, all our manufacturing happens in Italy, and we do have access to plenty of talent, mostly because we don't have to compete with big tech, which is in the United States absorbing a lot of the talent in quantum. So I think that's a huge asset for Europe. Access to a lot of amazing engineers, also at a fraction of the cost in many countries of what you would pay in Silicon Valley. So Europe should definitely consider this one of its most prized assets in the quantum race.
Leonardo?
I agree, and I would just add that you asked earlier, what are the features that distinguish quantum from other fields? I think one of those is that it's capital-intensive technologies, so where you are and build it matters. And so creating localized centers matters too, to attract talent, to attract resources. And the other element at the same time is that supply chains are widely distributed. That includes talent, but it also includes components of technology. So, some of the work we do at ICFG is on scenarios, and with the instability with the fading out of geopolitical stability, collaboration is an option, and it should be an option in strategic fields, if anything in research, because it's unrealistic. Also, cutting off, as Andrea was saying, a piece of the supply chain means halting the development of an industry. And adversaries don't have this risk, don't have this variable, because they have centralized, fully controlled investment in their operations.
Marika, when we're talking about the tech sector in general, not just in quantum, we talk a lot about accelerators and scaling up and so on. And I know you're an anticipator. Unpack for us what that means in terms of what you do, but also in terms of this talent area that we're talking about.
Yeah, of course. So JESDA is an anticipator, so not an accelerator, but what the role of JESDA, again, is to support policymakers in better comprehending future scientific discoveries. So the way we do this is we have a mapping of future science that goes far beyond quantum computing. We work across 40 domains. They're organized in 5 platforms: quantum and advanced AI is one of them, but we also work on human augmentation. So that is all everything that that is linked to neurotechnologies, consciousness augmentation, how the human and the machine will collaborate or be co-hosted in the future. We work on eco-regeneration, geoengineering, and we have 2 more platforms, science diplomacy and foundational science. So what we do as JESDA is we have a community of 2,000 scientists around the world. And what we do is we ask them through workshops. We run lots of workshops, but also surveys. We ask them what is it that they work in their labs today, or they know that their colleagues are working on, that will impact society in 5 years, 10 years, and 25 years. So that we first, it's a matter of raising awareness of that this research is taking place, that this research will impact society, that it will also impact the planet, probably, and the way humans are even cooperating. And then so that's the very first step that we do only with scientists. The second step of what JESDA does is it then presents this mapping to our diplomatic community in Geneva and abroad, so that we can initiate a dialogue between the scientists and diplomats or policymakers in general as to what should we do to ensure that this disruptive science is benefiting maximum of humanity. And that's this work is very much rooted in the human right to science. In the Human Rights Declaration, there is a covenant that says that every human has the right to contribute first and then benefit from the advancement of science. So that's a very important right for JESDA, and we know that Europe is one of the great proponents of the human rights in general and human right to science in particular. And that's how, during this dialogue, quantum computing came very high on the agenda. And that's from this work that the Open Quantum Institute has effectively emerged. So it's guiding principles that guide also the work of the Open Quantum Institute, this inclusivity, accessibility of science. With regards to your other question on talent and the barriers to international collaboration, even at the stage of research, but even more between commercial companies, that was very much a statement that and a situation that led to the creation of the Open Quantum Institute. The scientists, the industry players in particular, were very concerned that those barriers were actually increasing. And with the Open Quantum Institute, they wanted to create a place where international collaboration is possible with nations that have quantum capacity, but also nations that do not yet have quantum capacity, including emerging economies. So that for those the scientists, but industry in particular, what they find at the Open Quantum Institute is access to talent, and access to talent everywhere around the world, brightest minds that want to contribute to making computers happen, but also to developing the applications that are relevant for their markets, for their community, for their local challenges.
Thank you, Marika. I'm going to take another question from the audience, and I will remind everyone that you can use Slido, or you can use the box beside you if you're joining us online to put questions to our panelists. For those in the room, the QR code is there for you to scan with your phones, and I'll receive it here on my tablet. This question is a rather nice one, Pascal, to you. It's Mathilde Chianou from the Joint Research Centre is asking, what can they do from the JRC to support the work of DG Connect? So, rather pleasant question for a Commission representative, I think.
With the colleagues of JRC, there is indeed units working in quantum in the DGGRC, the Joint Research Center, And we collaborate with them on many different files. I was mentioning the risk study on supply chains, also on the deployment of infrastructure. Here I'd like to mention the EuroQCI, which is the deployment of a quantum communication infrastructure. We work with GRC because there are some experts in quantum technologies. They help us on that. And when we develop also our calls for the community, for the stakeholders, we check the input, the content with our colleagues from GRC. So there are a lot of relations with them.
Another question from the audience just coming in. The question is whether or not we need to see from the Commission any active legislation, I suppose, similar to something like the AI Act, or perhaps recommendations on quantum in the next mandate, and would the industry welcome these? I won't put you on the podcast, Pascal, because we don't know yet what the next Commission is going to look like. But in terms of what you might put on the ground with new recommendations or policy, tell us what the next steps might be. And then I will come to the others to see what they would like.
Yeah, exactly. So the new commission should begin on beginning of December. We don't even know the name of the commissioner for digital, so it's a bit difficult for me to answer to this question. However, we are now, and this I would like to mention something about the different files and calls and programs, and it's difficult to understand. It's totally right. And we are now working on what we call a quantum pact with the different member states. The idea is to get an harmonization of the different programs so that it's easier for the stakeholders to understand and not to have to go to national calls, EU calls, etc. So we are working with the 27 member states on that, and results will come in the coming months. What we could expect for the future, like the AI Act, for instance, we can dream of a quantum act. But again, we don't even know the name of the commissioner, so difficult to...
Yeah, a little bit of speculation required there. Leonardo, what do you think is needed in terms of policy steps, possible regulation, possible recommendations? I recall when we first talking about AI, which was several years ago now, and the AI Act happened quite quickly for a Brussels piece of legislation, but glacially slow when compared with industry. So tell us a bit about what you might like to see for quantum, and where might we learn lessons from the past?
To me, 3 priorities: execution, execution, execution. So if anything, I think we had a big wave of digital and technology policies from the last mandate, and some of them will have to be implemented. And I think there is an opportunity to focus the next Commission on rationalizing and implementing what already exists. Focus on neglected but disproportionately important resources such as public procurement. Again, 1% efficiency equals about 20 billion euro gain. And I think, there is a definition of common sense that is, you have to have sufficient means to achieve a goal, or put differently, your goals can never exceed the number of resources that you have at your disposal. And I think right now, understanding what are our strategic goals, do we have sufficient and proportionate means to address them, and are we engaging are they owned by the right people, and are we engaging the right actors to pursue them? That would be my agenda for the next Commission.
Andrea, I've had the impression you would quite like a bonfire of red tape. But are there areas where effective recommendations, regulations could facilitate industry? I'm thinking like perhaps sort of directions on interoperability or support for underlying infrastructure, that sort of thing, where there might be a role to be played there where better policy might increase investment and grow the whole sector.
I think there's one thing that comes to mind, and it's a strong, big European defense project. Quantum needs a buyer, and technology and companies are not yet ready to buy quantum technologies. We need the militaries to do that. As it happened with computers 67 years ago when they were coming out of the labs. DoD, NASA, these were the buyers of the early computers. The early chips were used as controllers for bombs. And as much as we don't like that, well, that's how this field of computing all started at a commercial level. And you should have us act together and start serious defense organization that then can back projects like quantum. That's my dream.
Matthew, I'll come to you in a moment because we can expand on questions around DARPA and what we can learn there as well. But Marika, you had a reaction as well.
Yes, on that governance issue, of course, as I said, at OQI, we've been curating this discussion. And what I just wanted to say, our scope is multilateral governments. So what is the current multilateral, multi-country regulation that effectively applies to quantum computing? That's not an easy question. So that's already a starting point for this group, that we have started sketching the state of play of the multilateral governance that applies to quantum computing in a few key domains: digital inclusivity, environmental impact, talent development and anticipation of the future of work, security and safety, of course, and standardization initiatives. Because, of course, here we're at a panel that is mostly dedicated to EU stakeholders. But what I wanted to say is just give you the perspective of some other countries that do not have the same amount of public funding in quantum computing, that do not necessarily have a quantum computers in development in their country. Those countries are still interested in participating in this discussion about the global governance, especially with regards to responsible practices, because even if they don't have a quantum computer or quantum scientists, a large amount of quantum scientists in their country, still their economies in the future might be affected by quantum computers. We talked about the wide scope of applications, the disproportionate advantage that some users might be if they control quantum computers. You can imagine that those sectors are also sectors that are of vital importance for emerging economies. And so I'm speaking, for example, just to give you the example of one country, the ambassador of Morocco is very active in our group, and what he's telling us is Morocco may never develop its own sovereign quantum computer. Now, if you're telling me that quantum computing will accelerate materials discovery, that it may affect the value chain or the production, the way we manufacture fertilizers, that's of interest to me and to my country, because fertilizers are an important, extremely important sector for us. I need to know that this sector may be affected, and then I, as the ambassador, my role is also to contribute to shaping a governance of quantum computing that take all of those aspects, the effective impact on my constituents in consideration. So I just wanted to give you this perspective, because the discussion, of course, is focused on the EU, but the multilateral governance is also a very important topic, and the EU is contributing very effectively to the shaping of it.
That's why you're joining us, Marika, albeit remotely, so you can bring that perspective. Thank you. Mattia, I did promise to come back to you to build a little bit on what we were saying here.
Thank you, and I will pick up on a few things that were said. Of course, we're also waiting to hear who's going to be the new commissioner, or a group of commissioners who will be working on this, but very, very eager to engage.
And there may well be a defence commissioner. This is being talked about a lot.
Exactly. And I appreciate that point as well. We are NATO is a serious alliance, a serious defense alliance, so we already have that type of organization that can act and project principles of responsible use and certain technological signals. That's why adoption is a priority. We're increasingly looking into how we can adopt emerging and disruptive technologies. There's a multitude of ways how that can be done. Procurement is one of them, critical one for sure. There's also a lot we can learn from the civilian sector, from previous green transitions and previous work that was done recently also by the EU. That's why it's important that the EU is at the table together with its member states, many of which are also in NATO. So we are really, really looking for that type of joint work, because after all, in the Euro-Atlantic area, we are all democracies, and we should, in that way, kind of recognize that there is a shared garden that we should be developing.
Now, looking to the audience questions, I'm seeing a couple here in relation to crypto and how we can move forward with that sort of element. Stephen Fleming is asking about whether we will see any implementing acts from the current cryptography regulation, such as NIS2. What might the Commission do in looking towards a sort of a post-quantum crypto world, and what's likely to come out of that? Pascal, perhaps you could tackle that a little bit.
The post-quantum crypto.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is called PQC. The Commission has released a post-quantum crypto recommendation some weeks ago, and in fact, it's to tackle the issue of the future quantum computer being able to encrypt our sensitive communication. And the recommendation, it's a recommendation, so it's not, a strong regulation, to ask to the different administration in Europe to envisage the installation of a post-quantum crypto algorithm. This also is done in United States, where the administration have to make an inventory of their encryption systems and go to PQC. And I'd like to mention here that the NIST in the United States made a competition for selection of post-quantum crypto algorithm, and the winners were from Europe researchers. So you see that the EU is very strong in the domain. So yeah, to answer to the question, we have established a PQC recommendation to go to this encryption mechanism.
Another question, this time touching more on infrastructure, from Tony Shortall at Telage, so I suppose relevant to him. Point-to-point connectivity. The question here is, he's understanding that if we want quantum deployed in the general economy, we'll need to upgrade many of our fibre networks. Is that your understanding of it? Andrea, let me ask you, what sort of upgrades are we needing across Europe already?
Well, we first need to invent something that doesn't yet exist, which is a functioning quantum memory or a repeater. So this is a fundamental ingredient to build quantum networks at scale. And they don't really exist at a level where they're deployable and with the performance that we need. So yeah, the infrastructure would have to be completely revamped and rebuilt. And frankly, I don't see a strong case for that at the moment. And while there are strong arguments for transitioning to post-quantum cryptography, I don't see strong arguments for adopting quantum ways of encrypting data at the moment.
Pascal, in terms of the broader question, DG Connect is focused on upgrading to fibre. Is that something that we're going to see more of under the next mandate? Do you see that push to improve connectivity as part of the digital decade is going to continue? I know I'm asking you to speculate again.
No, it's something we are already working on. You were mentioning the quantum repeater. This is next step, I would say. For the moment, the EuroQCI project is working with the technology QKD. It has its limitations, but we are working on it, and some European startups are developing these technologies. And also the projects that we are, for the calls we are sending are about integration of these elements in the current telecom infrastructure, so that we wouldn't have to rebuild everything to make the installations of these new devices. So there are progresses on using the current infrastructures and not making again a new fiber network.
Axel Ferrazini has mentioned the European Patents Office July 2024 report, saying that of the top patentees in quantum, there's no European companies in the top 10 and only 4 in the top 20. So suggesting that there is a big gap. And what should the EU do to reverse that? We've all come full circle. That's a very big question, but perhaps, Leonardo, any thoughts on what might be good steps?
Many of the ingredients, I don't think there is one solution, right? And I would say, I would be interested to see of those companies, how many have European founders? So they might be US companies, but how many of those are European, have European inputs? I think many. And so the question becomes, how do we remove barriers so that these people want to found, and I think grow these companies in Europe? And I think we mentioned many. I mean, part of it is a larger market. Part of it is easier access to de-risking funds, attraction of private capital. I think, to me, again, going back full circle to the Draghi report as well, this is a little bit of a whatever it takes moment to build industry, right? It takes a concerted effort of sizable proportions to build the baseline and the infrastructure for future industry. Now, obviously, to me, political consensus or consensus is not an innovation strategy. There is no consensus yet on what needs to be done. Risks need to be taken. So if we're waiting for everybody to decide which restaurant to pick tonight, I don't think we'll ever get to the quantum restaurant. But this is now or never.
Well, I'm going to take a final round from everyone, ideally to give us your key takeaway, but also to say, what do we need for sensible governance and increased use of or development of quantum? Marieke, I'll start with you, not just in Europe, but what you think might be a nice framework globally.
Yeah, what I see is, especially in this domain of quantum, is what is really needed is robust, honest evidence on what the technology can deliver today, but also what it will deliver tomorrow, with some indication of timeline, time frame. That's very important to define an agile governance, and it's a very complex exercise, as we said. And that kind of information, that kind of evidence, you only get if you bring together a sufficiently representative and diverse group of stakeholders, industry from the largest corporates to the youngest startups, of course, academic leaders, industry leaders, but also philanthropists and the civil society that is at the moment not so much involved in the debate, I should say. And for me, that's ensuring that multiple perspectives are taken into account when devising this governance is a critical factor.
Pascal, from your perspective, DG Connect, what do you think we need for sensible governance of quantum, bearing in mind the current level of overall understanding and knowledge about it?
Well, for me, I will come back to the two main points. Now, on the public sector, public funding, we need to progress quickly with this quantum pact with the different member states for an harmonization of the development of quantum technologies and how to do it exactly, be it on the research part, the investment part, infrastructure deployment. And the second point I would like to stress, I've mentioned it at the beginning, it's really to get more involvement of big industries in the domain. This is for me important. I think the public sector is really making big efforts. Now it's up to the private sector also to do it.
Key takeaways, yes?
I'll just start. I want to finish on a positive note. I think that the fact that there is so much interest in quantum by so many esteemed colleagues and powerful organizations means probably that this is an important thing, and it's going to be an important thing in the world. Moving forward, we need, I will also say 3 things. We need to be able to de-risk the next stages for quantum, for whichever technology. We need to get the volumes that we need, be it talent, be it funding, private and public. And we need benchmarking that would allow us to have some kind of security for what is next. Is it a very forward-looking partnership, or is it some other form of governance? That remains to be seen.
And
3 takeaways from me. Let's always remember that it's still a long journey before this technology really starts to impact. It's still very much in the R&D phase, and this has consequences. Number 2, barriers do harm research and development. Another thing that it's critical for us and for many of the companies we work with and also academic groups we work with. Third, let's not just focus on computing. I mean, the technology is in its earliest stage on the computing side, but sensing is a way more mature technology. Let's have a broader view of the potential of quantum. The infrastructure for enabling these new technologies. In order to build quantum computers, quantum sensor, and quantum communication system, we need better cryogenics, we need better control electronics, we need better photonic chips. All these things that way of applications outside of quantum can and must be supported more and be more in the focus of policymakers and just build the whole quantum computer. That remains a rather elusive goal, and one that will take time and a lot of capital.
And Leonardo, final word you get.
I mean, hard to add, but I would say 2 things. One is to build the industries of the future, you have to put innovators in charge. And I lived this firsthand. My last job at a big tech firm was helping launch a center for quantum networking. And the only way you can procure, design these programs is if you know really about it. Second, I think develop roles. You have to expand what quantum means. So one of the things that we haven't mentioned is the importance of managerial skills as we move from lab to production. And that means risk-taking. And in Europe, we have to invent or de-risk the ability to make mistakes and learn from them. And the final point I would say is, I think quantum is seen as a little bit of a tennis match with this barrier being put up and seeing whoever gains. But it's not a zero-sum game because it's a distributed supply chain. So I'd like to shift it to a relay race where allies at least run in the same direction. And that means member states and commission, because, I mean, also, I was a civil servant at the commission. It's easier to take the blame, but there's only constraints that you work with. And it means across the Atlantic. So I think these 3 things.
Well, I think that's quite a positive note, and I like that analogy of a rally race of handing on and working in the same direction. So that's a very nice point to leave us with. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to all our panelists here in the room and Marika online. Thank you to you, the audience, for your questions and for joining us. And we hope you will join us again for more Euractiv debates. And finally, a big thank you to the Euractiv team and the International Centre for Future Generations for setting up today's discussion. Keep the conversation going online. Do use the hashtag EA Debates and share your thoughts, and have a wonderful day.